Welcome to episode 21 of the White Whale Marketing Podcast. As always, it's in collaboration with the Sport Marketeer. Before I tell you about it, let me add our team members today. We have Haral and we have AJ. How's it going, guys?
Not bad, not
Good,
bad.
good.
Perfect. And as I was saying, it's in collaboration with the Sport Marketeer as always. The Sport Marketeer is a newsletter that we've curated at White Whale Marketing, talking about the latest topics, opinions, and issues in sports marketing. So you'll see topics like athletes, sports business relating to sports marketing, and even just the latest news. So you can check that out. The newsletter comes out every Friday. You can subscribe, get sent directly to your inbox. It sounds super smart at the watering hole at work. And then, it's basically just the conversations we're talking about today in written form. And with that, as always, the three topics we have today are first off, if you're an athlete going, let's say soccer player going from North America to Europe, what do you need to know to make that transition from a marketing standpoint? Second, it's that time of year, as they say, 'tis the season, but it's sponsorship season now. So we're going to touch on that. And last but not least, would you pay $500 million for a sports subscription? We'll get into that and get into the latest news about that. But AJ, take it away with topic number one.
Well, I'm pretty sure everyone that's listening and you guys know about obviously Alfonso Davies and Atiba Hutchinson and Jonathan David. But now we're seeing even more athletes from North America, whether it's, CPL or MLS or even players that were just, born and raised here. They're now going to play in Europe. So obviously recently we had James Sands from New York City FC just signed an 18-month loan with Rangers in Scotland. Daryl Dyke from Orlando, he's going to West Brom. Ricardo Pepi has just signed a transfer to Augsburg. We've got Richie Larea from TFC going to Nottingham Forest. We've got Tejan Buchanan going to Club Bruges. It's just crazy, right? The Canadian and American talent going to Europe, conquering Europe, finally after all of these years of what we've been told is grassroots development. But we've got the soccer side down, right? But now my sort of question, kind of broad, not really much info behind it, more of opinion focused, is, what do these athletes do next? They've gotten the part of their game down, right? They're making, these $1 million transfers to these top teams. They're getting paid the big bucks to play in the best leagues in the world. But what can they do now? What are the next steps for, players like Tejan, players like Richie, players like Daryl Dyke, Ricardo Pepi, and James Sands? Like, what can they do to build their personal brand? What can they do from the marketing standpoint, off the field? Which is sort of my open question to you boys.
Haral,
It's definitely a good question. I think um, the best questions can be answered with another question. And so my question would be on that. We're talking about what's next. What should they do? My question would be, what have they done? We know that it takes a lot of development on the field to make the jump to Europe. And I think equally as like if you want to have a strong brand off the field, whether you're moving markets, whether you're transitioning to a new market, you got to start with looking at what you've already done in the market that you're currently in. So, if these players are going over to Europe on the basis of their football skills, their brand is only going to grow if they've already established a strong foundation. So I think you got to look internally first and, what have they done to establish their brand domestically? What has Tejan done in Canada? What have the rest of the guys done all across the leagues, whether it's the CPL or the MLS? And based on what they've done, is it something that they can continue to do and sustain that in Europe, or is it time to chart a new path?
Yeah, I would obviously you always got to continue building on it, right? You're not just going to build something up and then be like, oh, scrap that and move on, unless it's like a horrible brand. Yeah, that makes sense. But obviously, yeah, you want to build on the foundation that you have. But I think too, you're also getting in front of a new audience too, right? But then you got to still, remember, let's say those Canadian followers you have. So I think a great way to kind of do it is almost like diving into this new landscape, like this new city you're in, right? Let's say you're going from, I don't know, Toronto or something to, I don't know, Munich. Kind of show that, right? Show that you're in Munich, right? The fans of, let's say, Bayern, let's say you're doing a transfer and like that, they want to see like, oh, hey, like I know that store, like I see him there. Whereas it's still like strikes a chord with Canadians. You're like, hey, look at our guy, right? He's in Europe, like we see him there. Whereas the Germans are like, oh, cool, like he's like actually like diving into the culture. I think that's a great way to start. And then, like you're saying, I don't know, the big one I always like to refer back to because it's kind of like a perfect one to get into if you're an outdoors person in Canada, there's outdoors everywhere in the world. Do that as well, right? Start discovering hikes, etc. Continually do that, and just find different ways to kind of touch on these new audiences you have, right? What would the Canadians want to see? What would the Germans want to see? And what's something like both would want to see, right? Whether it's just like I don't know. There's different ways to kind of build it out, and there's so many different aspects or types of brands that athletes can have. It's super interesting, but I think the most important thing too is when you're going to these new markets, you do need something, right? Otherwise, you're just gonna be like another guy coming in, right? You need something that kind of stands out.
I think something that's really important is sort of the culture of where they go as well. I mean, you look at, these really culturally rich places like Germany, for example, where Ricardo Pepi is going, right? You see, I don't know if you guys have seen a lot of like the Oktoberfest stuff that the Bayern Munich team does every year. They're wearing the lederhosen, they've got the pints of beer, and it's engaging stuff like that in the community and with these new cultures that these players are experiencing. It's not necessarily focusing on their brand, but it's sort of just embracing where you're going. And it's sort of allowing not only the people from Canada and North America to follow you on that journey, but it's also allowing the people that are in this new market to join in your story as well. So it's sort of trying to, I think what's really important is for guys like, for example, Richie Laryea, who's going to Nottingham Forest in England, he's going to a very, very historically rich place in England. Nottingham, for example, like Robin Hood. That's the story of Robin Hood. He needs to do stuff there to make himself known in that region, as well as how he is in Canada with obviously a lot of TFC fans. So then once he's sort of established himself in that area, that's when he can start, building himself up more and more and more.
Yeah,
The culture
I think.
piece. Sorry, I was gonna say the culture piece is really good. A quick point there is also like you're considering, like you have to adapt and be able to like mesh well with the culture that you're going into. At the same time, I think the fans of that market are gonna have a certain stereotype or a certain image of you before you even get there. Canadians and Americans have their differing stereotypes and their impressions on based on tourism mainly of how like a stereotypical Canadian or American is, and you got to either play that to your advantage or you got to make sure you separate yourself from that. Canadians obviously around the world are known for their politeness. I think in the football world, especially right now with the Cinderella story, or they're known as a Cinderella story and stuff, just a bunch of merry men like living in a frozen land or like a frozen land far away, just trying to play soccer on ice. Like these types of things are what soccer fans, especially in Europe, have an impression of when it comes to Canadian players, and similar to American players. So I think a big thing, like you said, AJ, with the culture of the place you're going to, you've also got to make sure that you understand what culture you're bringing and what impressions the fans have of you and how you got to play those cards.
Yeah, one thing that I'll kind of add on that too, though, is right, like a lot of like let's say we're using like the soccer example that you're using, right? A lot of these players, like unlike let's say other sports for hockey where you're kind of being traded within the league or you're transferring teams within the league, which is immediate, right? Whereas these transfers are typically, end of season or et cetera. Like there's time until that happens. So whether you're like a player that has absolutely nothing on your Instagram, you have, no real brand built up, you have time to actually build it up. Because think about it. When you enter this new market, people are gonna be like, wait, who is this guy? What's the first thing people do now, right? They Google you, they go on social media, they type this guy up or a girl up, right? And they're like, hey, like, what are they all about? And like my biggest thing is your social media should almost tell a story, right? Like your first 9 pictures, like that first like little grid that you see, you should look at it and like, okay, this person likes outdoors, they like chicken, blah blah blah, they're married, etc. Right? It tells you all you need to know about them, and then once you scroll, you're like, yeah, I want to see more of it, and you kind of go through it. So you almost want to paint like a story before you even get to that new market, because whether it's going to be the media, whether it's going to be potential new fans, everyone's diving into it right away, right? So you're going to see like a huge amount of reach when you first enter, and you want to keep that going, right? Whether it's like let's say it's like a media person, right? They see they're like, hey, like, why is this guy like fighting a moose, right? Maybe it's like fake, like CGI, like you do something like that as a joke, but like something like that, or like, hey, like I want to know more about it, right? So maybe then you get into an article written about you, or hey, you get on a podcast in that new market, and people just want to keep knowing more about you, and then snowball effect, different areas, and then you start popping some things out. But no, it's pretty interesting and something we can dive into, which I'm sure we will more and more in 2022. Anything else, or should we move on to the next topic?
I think what it's reminding me of, let me pull it up here, see if I can find it. It reminds me of in like a sport economics class and a sport marketing class that I was doing. There's There's a quote we actually looked at, I'll pull it up here, from, we all know Gary Vee, right? And a big quote that he said was, the attention of the end consumer is all that matters. When you understand where it is, that's where you need to strike, create, and spend against. And that's what I think is really important, right? It's fans only have so much attention. And when it comes to sports, specifically soccer, they're very interested in the game, but the new generation is now sort of focused on what's going on, behind the scenes as well. We look at I would say very not attention seeking, but someone that gets a lot of attention, a player like Paul Pogba, right? He's got his Paul Pogba brand. He's a very flamboyant and, good player. He's very, all the different hairstyles all the time. Sort of his lifestyle off the pitch. And I think that's really important for these players is, just get some attention. Get some attention from your Canadian and American fans, get some attention from the local fans, and that's sort of going to build that loyalty one step at a time. And I think that's going to be really important for these guys going forward. And honestly, they're still young. They've got, some of them will have another 10, 15 years playing at the professional level and so much more ahead of them. So it's really important they can maximize, their fan engagement as early as they can to, carry on their legacy.
Yeah. And I guess the last thing we'll say on this topic is, we were talking before that, we went live. The biggest thing that we noticed in some of our analytics in regards to content is, people want to know, like, hey, how do I get sponsored? That's a big thing. Whether you're an athlete, whether you're an influencer, whatever, like, hey, like, how does this stuff work? The biggest thing is, like you're saying, Gary Vee, is the end user, right? Once you know who you're targeting, then you're just like, okay, like, what does that person want? And that's how this all started, right? Where when it was Nascimento Marketing, where it was me, my little personal brand, I knew I had a bunch of students who were interested in working in sports. So when I targeted brands that provided services or products for sports business students, and then bada bing, bada boom, I know a student from Ottawa had some sponsorships. So that's how it kind of goes. And I'm sure we'll have, episodes or even reels or different forms of content dedicated to it, because that's the money spot for us, right? So yeah, good stuff. On that note, I guess, kind of flows into perfectly. I completely forgot about it. The next topic is, it's sponsorship season, as they say. So yeah, the holidays just ended. No, it's not playoff. It is playoffs, not just for football. It's also for sponsorship and people within sports marketing, because as when the new year hits, so does the fiscal year for a lot of companies, right? So that means a lot of budgets are being renewed, which means there's a lot of, dollars available to, create different opportunities, whether it's sponsorship, marketing, etc. So this is time, at least for us, White Whale Marketing, firing away. My ass is sore as all hell because I've just been sitting at this chair all day long, and I have 800 steps at the end of the day. So I have to go on like hour and a half walks. But no, this is the kind of a good time, right? So the big thing is, with so many companies now being like, yeah, hey, like, we're open to hearing your solutions or what type of, sponsorship we can do. What would athletes be able to do? Or hey, like, what can teams do? Or what can, brands do to be like, hey, like, what can we do to capitalize this in January, right? So the question, I guess, that I'll ask is, if you were, let's say, an athlete, maybe you're an agent, what's something that you guys are thinking, like, hey, like, January, when everyone has money, this is what you should be doing?
Raul, want to take it away?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think the start of the year, it's a very interesting time, I think, for an athlete as well, or just for an average for the average person, because, you're really reflective in the first couple of weeks into the new year. New Year's resolutions, obviously a big trend. Whenever the calendar just turns and you're in the new year, you start thinking about, like, who you want to be and what kind of person you want to become. I think that ties in perfectly with sponsorships. And, for an athlete or for an agent, I think the first thing you got to do is think of, like, what kind of athlete do you want to be, or what kind of person do you see your athlete becoming? And that's where you start thinking of the companies and stuff that can help make that happen and be able to try to find those synergies. Obviously, it's a bit tough if, let's just say you're a streamer or an esports streamer or something, and then, like, you never leave your house, and then you're like, what, I want to become, like, the most jacked player, like the most, like, strongest man on the planet, and you're going to go to Strongman for a sponsorship. It's a bit, that's where, obviously there's no synergy there. But, like, hey, if you're like outdoors is probably like the most popular one we always talk about on the podcast. But, if you went skiing in the wintertime, or if you went skiing in December and you like being an outdoors person, you might say, hey, I want to get out more. You don't see a lot of that on your Instagram. You make a goal to, like, be more active in your Instagram as well and show that on your brand. And at the same time, start targeting those companies, being like, hey, I've done this before. I'm an athlete. Like, I'd love to, talk about how we can help grow your brand and stuff and work together. I think that's where you got to start thinking. You want to think about the person you want to be, and then start thinking about the companies that can help you get there, and then also, think about the companies you can help take to another level.
I think it's really important what you emphasize there is sort of knowing. You don't obviously know. No one really needs to know exactly who they are, but what's important to you, what interests you, how do you see yourself, and things along those lines. And another really important thing that I find as well is, what do you value? What are things that are important in your life, and what do you value? I know a lot of we're seeing a lot of environmentally friendly products and environmentally friendly organizations now. And for example, if you're an outdoorsy person and you're someone that's really, focused on helping the environment, a company like Patagonia is perfect, for example. Obviously, it's a massive organization, but I think it's just really important to know where your values lie, and also the value that you hold at the same time. So someone that's really outdoorsy and is, could be a big athlete in the top league and really values that environmentally friendly stuff, they can work with a company, that, uses biodegradable stuff and eco-friendly products that's sort of, outdoorsy and adventure focused. And then you're providing value for them at the same time. So I think it's really important to align yourself with what you believe is, true to yourself, and then also stuff that interests you at the same time.
Yeah, and like there's kind of two things I'd like to kind of dive into from that, right? The first is kind of building off what Raul said, but also you too, right? You got to think about it as if you're a university graduate and you're going to an interview, right? If you're talking about like, hey, like it'd be so great to work for, I don't know, let's say TD Bank, right? Let's use Raul, the Canucks behind him. Hey, like I want to work for the Canucks. Just, hey, I need the job. I need to pay rent. Hey, like this job would be so good for me. And you're just saying everything that the Canucks can do for you. Like, hey, like why are we gonna hire this person? Like, what are we gonna get out of it? You got to think that you put yourself in their shoes and be like, hey, how can I provide them with value? So if you're in an interview with the Canucks, you're like, hey, you guys should hire me because I'll be able to help transform your social media, make it more engaging. And the way I'm going to make it more engaging is X, Y, Z. So now taking into a sponsorship standpoint, hey, using AJ as example, let's say you want to go to Patagonia, right? You're a big outdoors person, you care about the environment, etc. Okay, you go to them rather than be like, hey, like I love your brand, please just give me anything for free. That's not going to work because we get thousands of people like that. But if you go to them, you're like, hey, I noticed there's an issue or there's a hole here. You need to work with me for X, Y, Z, and it's going to help you guys in 1, 2, 3 reasons. They're like, oh shit, like you almost got to build an argument or a case where like, yeah, I need this, this person, this guy, this girl, because if we don't, I don't know how we're going to solve this issue, right? So that's one thing. And the other thing that kind of AJ touched on that's top notch is in regards to value and like your personal values. I know we're using value in two kind of senses here, but I've had meetings with companies, right? And yeah, cool. Like you can get let's use Ronaldo as an example. Like what brand wouldn't want Ronaldo, right? But times are kind of changing now where, yeah, companies we're throwing Ronaldo money for like, I think it was like Herbal Active Fit or whatever it was called, or that ab company, etc. Whoever threw in the bag, they're like, yeah, let's do it. And they didn't really care because they just want to be attached to Ronaldo. But what brands are starting to see now, especially with this new generation that's coming up, that's much more conscious of, what brands they're wearing or who they're, supporting. They want athletes or even like influencers, if you're an influencer listening, they want people that have like values that are aligned, right? So let's say all hell breaks loose and there's another, I don't know, another social thing that takes place. They want something that's going to be in line with their values, right? They're like, hey, like we stand against, I don't know, I don't even want to say anything, but like, hey, like we're for green markers, right? And they want their athlete to be for green markers as well, right? Because then if the brand's for green markers, they're like, no way, man, I'm for blue markers. And they're like, well, shit, like there's gonna be that disconnect. So it's the thing you're talking about as well, where you want that synergy, not only of, hey, what value can both parties provide each other, but then kind of more in a further back standpoint of, hey, like looking at it from a macro approach too, or like, hey, like we align on all different levels rather than just like, hey, my audience likes your product and so do I. And I think it's a good fit from a business standpoint, right? So yeah, both great points, and as always, we can just talk about this all day long and that stuff because that's what white whale marketing is. But unless you guys have other points to get to, we can move on.
I think the one thing that just as like a closing thing is you can't forget the basics. You said there, if the audience aligns, that's one thing that's really important. Is you need to have an audience. You can't be someone. We all talk about the importance of social media and the importance of creating yourself as a brand. And I think you have to have that following. You have to have a lot of people that are supporting you. Otherwise, these brands aren't going to want to work with you because they're not going to have any value themselves, right? What's the point of them sponsoring you, giving a bunch of free stuff, if it's only going to reach a few hundred people? They're going to go for the athletes that have 5, 10, 15, even 100,000 followers on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and Twitter, so that they can actually reach the largest audience possible. So it may take some time before you can actually get those sponsorships, but that's what content marketing is for. That's what for meet and greets. That's what social media is for. It's to build your audience up first, so then you can get those sponsorships in the future. The audience is the most important part.
AJ, that's where I have to disagree with you, man. Because think about it. When I graduated, I think I was in university. I was finishing university. Like I was talking about, I built this like Nessamento marketing personal brand. Hey, I'm Chris. I'm a sports marketer, right? That's what I was trying to connect myself to. So rather than branding myself as an outdoorsman, I was branding myself as a sports marketer. So if you Googled Chris, you're like, shit, he's a sports marketer, right? I had 800 followers, right? According to you, AJ, I wouldn't get sponsored, correct?
I think it depends. I'm talking big scale. I think that's the issue, right?
He's rolling back.
Hey. I'm not rolling back on my point. I'm saying for like it depends on the level, I think, of athlete that we're talking about. Because if we're talking like NCAA athletes, but if we're talking like a semi-professional athlete, I think it could be a lot different. If we're looking at we want sponsorships from the top brands, I think that's where the audience can be really important. But I think at the same time, the sponsorship can also help you build an audience at the same time. So I think it kind of depends on your level.
But you'll be so. This is where it all this is where we can talk about this all day. So let's talk about big brands, right? So big brands, I've heard numbers where how can I say this? Let's call a camera company. That's all I'll say. I've heard of a camera company, and they were paying a top level athlete X amount of dollars. Okay, and I think this person. More than 500,000 followers, I think is what it was. So they do numbers, correct?
They do numbers,
right? And myself, my personal brand, then it just transitioned to Way Well Marketing. We're at like 1,000 something, not a stupid amount of followers, right? The podcast, the route that I had going, right, kind of put it a little bit to the side to focus more on Way Well Marketing. I think in a year's time frame, the numbers nowhere close. It's decent numbers. Some episodes got a couple hundred listens. The average is probably about 80 to 100. So nothing like crazy numbers compared to someone who has 500,000 followers. But the deal for the sponsorship was worth the money that we received for the sponsor was about half of what this big camera company was paying this top level athlete. So I think there's different levels to it, right? Whether it's first off, you just got to connect with the right brand, right? Whether it's someone like,
yeah,
I think this camera company, they're like, hell no, we just want to be like partner with this huge person, right? And that's when maybe the athlete's like, yeah, cool, whatever. Maybe they don't have that expertise in their corner to be like, hey man, like you're worth way more than that. So knowing your worth is a big thing. I've been putting out reels for that on our account, where that's something I want to be pushing 2022, and news will be coming in regards to that in the coming months. But then also it's, I knew who my audience was, right? I had a target audience of, hey, sports business students. So then when I went to brands and they're like, yeah, but you don't have like a ton of numbers. I'm like, yeah, sure. Well, if you were to go to someone else, they would have a more diverse following. My whole following, 95% is your target audience. So
it's the concentration of your audience is what's really important. I think that's the best term for it. Yeah.
But there's still micro segments, or they're not micro segments. There's segments within all these different athletes, right? So even someone has 500,000 followers, maybe they have 20,000 that are into films, 20,000 are into outdoors. So you can still target those. You just got to understand who your audience is, and then understand how you can provide value to both them, the brand, yourself, and also just make sure like you're just taking a macro approach, right? Connect on a business level, but then you can also connect on a personal level, and it's like a win-win for all parties involved, which is 3. But yeah, I can
We could talk about this all day.
I mean, we made a business out of it. So yeah. Anyways, Haral, let's take it away with our last topic.
Yeah, a good segue into that is my last tip for anyone listening to this that wants to know, like, what they should do for 2022 when it comes to, better understanding the sports marketing space, the sports sponsorship space. I mean, if you're not following us by now, I don't know what other case we can give you guys, but make sure you give the Sport Marketeer and White Whale Marketing a follow, see what we're up to, and learn a lot because, it ties in really well to my topic here because, we're talking about $550 million for sports subscriptions. This content here is free. Don't know for how long, but don't know for how much, but it's free for now. So you got to take advantage of that while you can. And so going on to our last topic here, recently, I think we all have become very engaged digitally with our sports news. It's the only way we get it now, especially with TV also taking a spin on streaming, and we focus more on just streaming our games. All of us here subscribe to The Athletic, and many of you may also subscribe to The Athletic, which recently just got acquired for $550 million by the New York Times. Now, before we get into, actually talking about, the impacts of this, like what we think about it, just going to run on some quick numbers for you guys. So, you can impress people all you want with the numbers. The initial valuation for The Athletic was hoping to be somewhere around 800 plus million. Clearly that number has gone down and they had to settle on a number at 550. The Athletic actually hasn't turned in a single profit with their platform, I think ever, or yeah, at least for 2020, and I think for most of 2021, 0 profits turned over. But we all know and love and appreciate what The Athletic is doing, and clearly the New York Times also has an eye for it. They have a goal to reach about 10 million subscribers on the New York Times platform by 2025, and I think they're about 80% of the way there. And The Athletic has a million plus subscriptions as well. So there's no idea of exactly how the subscription for The Athletic is going to impact the New York Times subscription or how they're going to cross integrate and stuff. But clearly the New York Times in the world of journalism is trying to take a step into that digital space because the day of the newspaper and the day of print media is literally not even last year, not even last decade, it's last century. And so now that we're here in this new, honestly, it might be even last millennium, but now that we're here in the 21st century, the idea of digital journalism is taking over, and The Athletic really created a name for themselves by establishing themselves as, the new standard for sports journalism. The New York Times has caught an eye of it. And, it's just a very interesting topic to follow for anyone who subscribes to either of the products themselves. And you guys, obviously, as followers of The Athletic, maybe not even so much focusing on what do you think of the acquisition. What do you guys think of The Athletic so far? How has it changed, the way you consume your media and stuff? And we were talking about this a bit before. We're not the biggest fans of The Athletic, but there's a lot of cool things they're doing, and there's some things we don't like about it. So I'm interested to hear about, what you like and don't like about it, because it might help justify why the $800 million valuation went down to 550 real quick.
For sure. I guess the first thing, Corral's bang on regarding, maybe we got to focus a little more time on the Sport Marketeer if, they're selling for 550. Maybe get a couple more writers in or something, but what a number. And then the second point to that too is, it's kind of building off what you're saying. Like obviously I love the Athletic, right? And we're talking about, athletes. That's a huge part. That's the core part of the White Whale marketing business. But I think that's the best part about it, right? When you're getting these in-depth athlete profiles. For instance, I'm a huge Senators fan. Ian Mendes, he's the reporter for the Athletic.
The GOAT.
For the Senators. Yeah. And he he goes, I think he went to, Grand Forks or Fargo, North Dakota, wherever UND is. And, he spent time with top prospects there, and he was able to write a full-blown, proper, in-depth profile about these top prospects, where normally, okay, this guy went to the development program, X, Y, Z, and you're like, okay, cool. From an athlete branding point of view, when you have platforms like this that are massive, right, where all these core sport fans are, and you're getting to learn more and more. If I'm a player, and that's one of the things we talked about on on Reels, I think we released last week. You want to get involved with media because that's how it pushes your name more, right? And it connects you to like-minded, interests, right? So if you're getting featured in the Athletic, that's money now, right? Because people are like, hey, you know what, this Jake Sanderson guy, he's kind of nice. He sounds kind of, I like him. I like him from what Ian wrote, and you know what? I think I'm gonna follow him a bit more, and I want to see how his journey goes because, I just spent 10 minutes reading about him, and now I want to know more. I'm gonna watch his videos. I'm gonna watch other interviews. So I think they're profiles and even their columns specifically going on with different teams because I think they have a writer for basically every major team. I love that. Where it gets a little gray for me is when it's like there's some just like, no offense, like bullshit articles that you can tell they're just putting out there just to like be like, hey, here's an article for you to read. Because like those nice articles take a lot of time to write. So yeah, that's my point of view. We'll get into it more after. But AJ.
I think just what they're doing is just completely different from my experience with the Athletic. They're sort of trying to, from when they sort of swept into the journalism industry.
AJ, you cut out.
I think his mic might have died.
I don't know why it keeps doing that.
You're good now.
There we go. All right, but yeah, what I was saying is what they did is they sort of swept into the journalism industry very quickly, and I think what they were trying to do is they were just trying to be like a pain in the ass when they joined. They were going after the big industry players, not only in the States but also in the UK as well, because they understood how big the football market was in Europe and the UK especially. And I think what they've just been doing so far is, we're not seeing really dumb and honestly somewhat useless news articles, especially when it comes to soccer. I mainly focus on the soccer side when I read the Athletic. You see like the Sun and the Telegraph and the Daily Mail in the UK. They're focusing, oh, this soccer player was seen out in London. No, they're actually focusing on really important stuff. They're focusing on actual solid journalism within the soccer industry. And I think that's what's really important, is that they're staying on track to sort of overtake these pre-existing companies. And that's why I think they're so attractive to the New York Times, especially with their acquisitions of TIFO, right? They're incorporating more elements of sport into their operations. And I think that's why they're valued at over almost 800 million. Obviously it's only 550, but I think it's just the potential they have to disrupt the industry as a whole is why they're valued so high.
Yeah, the disruption piece is really interesting because obviously the birth of the Athletic really came from the layoffs that came from ESPN. A lot of great writers were laid off by ESPN, and they came together and someone built the Athletic and brought them all on. Some of the biggest names in sports are currently writing for the Athletic. Obviously in hockey, we have some of the biggest names in data science as well, with like Don Lucian, Ian Mendez, Haley Salvian covering like specific teams, and obviously like James Myrtle covering it for the Leafs there. But also you've got Ken Rosenthal for baseball. And the reason why Ken Rosenthal is really interesting is because he was also featured on MLB Network. And for those who are following baseball recently, Ken Rosenthal actually got fired from the MLB Network because he was a bit too critical of the commissioner of baseball. So yeah, Rob Manfred is a controversial character for many, many reasons, but for one of the best and most respected journalists to be, kicked off the MLB Network, one of the only places you're going to find him is now the Athletic. And the Athletic has limited barriers to or has limited censorship, I would say. Like they're not going to fire Ken Rosenthal for speaking out against the MLB commissioner because they don't have specific ties to the league. So they're really disrupting the status quo, and they've been trying to do that ever since. And this whole Ken Rosenthal news, it kind of helps the Athletic brand even more, I find. Where it gets a bit tricky, or where I guess the tightrope is for the Athletic, is now your whole goal was to disrupt print media, and now you're getting bought by the New York Times. How much freedom are you going to have as a platform to be able to do the things that you're doing? And obviously money is important, which is why the whole sale happened there. But like, what's the goal here? What's the New York Times going to do? Are they going to just end up cannibalizing the Athletic and just creating their own version of it, or are they going to let the Athletic be what they want and still operate the way they are, and technically be a rival to companies like the New York Times, while still being I guess a small company or a sister company of theirs?
Yeah, it's like an interesting. I think like we may have like touched on this right before we started recording, where it's like it's an interesting like flow the way the world works, right? Where you have these huge paper companies, right? These huge publications like the New York Times, they're like the top dogs, blah, blah, blah. And then you have like a company that starts like the Athletic to kind of, be the opposite of it, right? Like, hey, we're going to kind of disrupt the market a bit. But then it kind of goes so far one way where it's almost like the subscription. Obviously, the New York Times still has more subscriptions. But like in regards to like a specific sports section of it, it kind of gets so big where maybe the like a big publication again, they're like, you know what, we see value actually in them because maybe they're the ones that are starting to drive revenue now, because that's what people have interest in. And like stuff like this has happened in the past where like even like what would be an example? Let's say like Apple, right? They started off creating like these devices for music, right? And they're trying to get people to like, buy these so then you can, listen to, I don't know, like Columbia, whatever records or whatever on there. And then they kind of go and end up making like their own platform. And then like maybe now they're like acquiring like different areas to kind of like stream their music and stuff like that, where they get so big that now they're taking over the companies that were bigger than them at one point, right? Where it kind of goes like in reverse, if you know what I mean. But no, it's interesting. I think they'll still have like they'll still be the Athletic because that's what their like brand is, right? Like the New York Times isn't buying the Athletic to become the New York Times. They see them as like an asset, right? That they can add to their portfolio, and I'm sure there's going to be ways that, like you're saying, like to meet their goals by 2025 that the Athletic can help with. But if that's when like acquisitions like fail, right? When this huge brand acquires a company and then they're like, hey, now that you're with us, don't do this anymore, don't do that, and put our logo everywhere a bit more. Then people are like, well, shit, like now I'm just subscribing to the New York Times again, and that's not why I was paying for the subscription, right? Like, even though like we've talked about this, like I read some articles in the New York Times, pretty good stuff. But would I pay for a New York Times subscription? Probably not. Will I pay for the Athletic? Probably, or I do. But yeah.
Yeah, I
AJ?
think that's the biggest thing. I was actually gonna ask, based on your experiences with the Athletic and stuff. Obviously, this might be something AJ can touch on. I know you focus a lot on it for soccer, and with the New York Times, one of their goals is just going to be like obviously to take the Athletic subscription and hopefully maybe help expand the New York Times viewership, right? Like Chris mentioned, he read one article and stuff. Maybe if like the Athletic subscription gets you some free things with the New York Times, obviously they can try to market in a way to get you to subscribe to more products. Do you see a lot of non-soccer related stuff, or do you feel that like the algorithm and the way that you have your Athletic account configured and based on the articles you read, do you like only get soccer stuff, or do you end up dabbling in other sports sometimes?
I think the one thing that I do like about the Athletic is that when I go on it voluntarily and I go and look at the Athletic, I will focus a lot on the soccer stuff. But what I really like about the Athletic, just from a personal standpoint, is that when I get the email every week, I think it is, or every few days, I can't remember, it shows me everything.
Email.
So then I get email notifications for it. Like I get an email saying like the Athletics. See if I can actually find one on
You
here.
can get like the front page email to you almost, or
Yeah.
like a front page.
Yeah. So then when I see that in the morning, I have a look. Yeah, the Athletic Pulse. What COVID did to fantasy football. And it basically shows me the full article on my email. So then that actually gets me interested in other topics, and I think that's one thing that they do very well. Is sort of they're drawing people in with sort of like what we do here at the Sport Marketeer. You sign up for with the email, you can see the full articles, and I think that's what helps broaden the audience. I think that's what they do personally. Is obviously I'm very soccer focused, born and raised. I still watch football, I still watch hockey. Sometimes I watch baseball. Big NBA fan as well. So I think that's really important. Is how it doesn't just make people focus on one thing, but can let people explore the whole world of sport within one region. I think that's the really important part.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Like, for some reason, Bleacher Report, that's the one that I like tend to look at different topics, right? Where I follow like sporting news, soccer. I follow almost every sport on Bleacher Report, and that's free. Whereas the one that I pay for, I literally, even though I'm a Patriots fan too, I don't tend to read Patriots stuff. It's usually just like Ian Mendez and like the Senators. Well, but now with what you guys are saying, I'm like, hey, like I was even thinking during the podcast, I'm like, oh, maybe I'm gonna look at what other like subscriptions I can have within the app to kind of get notified for. But no, it's interesting, and it's funny to think, right? And over the last few episodes, right, we're talking today about like the Athletic getting acquired, huge thing taking place, and then I forget how many episodes ago it was, but like Nike Land taking place with Roblox, and there's so many different like collaborations, acquisitions, etc. that are taking place, and it's like, wow, like the world's like changing in front of us, right? Especially in the sports landscape. So I'm sure we'll have more than enough topics to discuss. Already have topics ready for next week. So as always, if you haven't already, subscribe to the Sport Marketeer. It comes out every Friday. You can click the link in the bio. It brings you straight to our Substack. You can check, previous articles, or just put in your email. Get sent to you every Friday afternoon, early evening, whatever you call it. And yeah, then you have things far away at the end of the week, and maybe just chill out on your Friday and read that at the end of the day. But yeah, unless you guys have anything else to say, thanks for joining us on episode 21.
Have a good night.